All right, guys, so today we're going to talk about printmaking. Let's get into it. So what is a print? So a print is artwork that exists in multiple copies in its simplest form. So all prints are created from a matrix. So a matrix is a physical surface. This can be a wood block, a metal plate, stone, or a stencil that is prepared to hold or transfer ink. So the image of the print is transposed onto the matrix, which is then transferred onto support. So this is typically paper, but you can also make prints on fabric or really any other material. So I like this quote from June Wayne about printmaking. So a print is a work of art, usually on paper, which has siblings. They all look alike. They are all made at the same time from the same matrix, same creative impulses, and they're all original. The fact that there are many of them is irrelevant. So here's some of June Wayne's work. This is the Retreat. It's a lithography print from 1950. So you see at the bottom there, it's edition 5 out of 35. So that means that she made 35 prints of this design, and this is the 5th print that she made. So starting off with our first form of printmaking, we have relief printing. So relief printing typically starts with materials such as linoleum or woodblock. The artist carves away negative space, leaving raised surfaces to hold the ink. So these inked surfaces are then pressed onto paper to transfer the design and create the print. So the important thing to recognize about relief printing is that the areas you carve away actually become the negative space in the final image. So when artists work with relief printing, they're thinking about carving away all of the line work that they don't want to show up in the final image. So it's sort of like making a kind of reverse drawing. The sort of opposite of relief printing is intaglio printing. So the artist cuts grooves into a metal plate, typically, such as copper or zinc, and then ink is applied to the entire plate, and then the surface is wiped clean. So the surface doesn't really hold ink, but as you can see in our diagram here, in these grooves are what holds the ink. So intaglio printing, we're making marks that are then the same marks that'll show up in the final image, versus relief printing, where any of the marks we make are sort of cut away, become the negative space. So starting with our first printmaking technique, we have woodcut printing, which is a relief printing technique. So it's the oldest known printmaking technique, first utilized in 9th century China. It was typically used for making stamp designs onto fabrics and textiles. And then it also became popularized in Europe throughout the Middle Ages to make functional items, so things like playing cards. It sort of regained popularity in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by painters. So we have Gauguin, Munch, and Emil Node. So over here on the right, we have one of my favorite woodblock prints. This is the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse by Albert Dürer. So Dürer was a Dutch painter, printmaker during the German Renaissance. And in our image here, we've got the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. So it's conquest, war, famine, and death. So here's some more work by Dürer. We have his rhinoceros, which for a long time was the only depiction of a rhinoceros in Europe and sort of the go-to for scientific study. As you can see, it's quite inaccurate by today's standards, but Dürer was drawing off of a sketch and a written description he had received from someone who had seen an actual rhinoceros. And so this is kind of his interpretation of another interpretation. But as you can see, the level of detail is really impressive here. The way he's cross-hatching, the way he's creating shading. And remember, since this is a woodblock print, all of the white space you see is what he carved out, and all those tiny black lines are the sort of ridges he left in that woodblock as he made this. And then on the right, we have a self-portrait of Dürer at 28. So this is year 1500. He's also an extremely skilled painter. So moving into our next technique, intaglio printing. So etching is an intaglio technique where acid is used to sort of bite or etch into an image or into metal, a metal plate, typically copper or zinc. And so this sort of started in Europe in the late 15th century, became more popular throughout the Renaissance. And its advantages over woodblock printing is it offers greater detail and line quality options. So we have another work by Dürer here, St. Jerome in his study. It's 1514. It's copper engraving. And I'd just like to point out some of the details in this one. So Dürer's woodcut work was highly detailed, but his etching work kind of takes it to another level. So the way he's showing light here on the wall coming in through the window, the sort of one-point perspective of the scene, and the way he's got this halo of light over St. Jerome's head. These are all um, typical sort of artistic tropes that you would see in a painting, a Italian Renaissance painting at the time. And so remember, Dürer is a German printmaker and painter, but he's taking a lot of these sort of stylistic elements from Southern Europe and bringing them into printmaking. So Dürer is best known for his prints, and this is one of his most famous works. And it really shows off the level of detail you can achieve with intaglio printing. So next up, we have lithography. So lithography was invented in 1798 by Illis Stenfeller. Became popular throughout the 19th century. And so how does lithography printing work? Well, the artist draws an image onto a flat surface. So it's typically limestone or aluminum using a greasy substance like a lithographic crayon. The plate is then chemically treated with acid, which sort of locks in the drawing, kind of stabilizes everything, and also makes the sort of drawn areas greasy, right, which attracts ink, and the blank areas are smoother and they attract water. So it's considered a planographic process because the printing surface stays completely flat. So we're not cutting into the surface at all. There's no grooves or ridges. It's a flat surface that's just been chemically treated, so some of it holds ink, some of it rejects the ink. It's all sort of based off of the principle that oil and water do not mix. So over here on the right, we have a lithograph for the County Museum of Art in Los Angeles by John Miro, who's a Spanish artist. This was done in 1969. So Miro was a surrealist, an abstract expressionist. He did a lot of painting, but also printmaking. And our sort of advantage here we see with lithography is you can, in theory, make an infinite amount of prints, assuming the matrix stays intact. It's also easier to utilize a larger variety of color in lithography. So you can kind of paint over your matrix before you add in, before you press the paper onto it, which can give you a sort of large variety of color and texture, like we see here in Moreau's work. So last but not least, we have screen printing, which is a stencil-based printing technique. So again, another one originating in China. This one's from 10th century China, typically using silk screening. It eventually made its way to the US, became a popular technique for artists in the mid-20th century. It was used by advertisers for a long time and manufacturers before that. But mid-20th century, so sort of 1960s, we start to see it make its way into the fine art world. So screen printing relies on a stencil, which is sort of imposed on a fine mesh screen rather than any sort of printing press. And then ink is then applied to that stencil. And so it pokes through the areas of the stencil that are exposed, and then the sort of solid areas hold the ink. So in the 1960s, we have the emergence of the pop art movement. We have artists such as Andy Warhol, who use screen printing as an important element of their work. And so over here on the right, we have Andy Warhol's famous Campbell soup. And this was an edition of 32 prints Warhol made. And a lot of people sort of questioned these at the time, said, why is this art? Why do I care? But that was sort of the question that Warhol wanted to ask the art world and ask his viewers of why not. Um, so the Campbell's soup was an extremely common household item at the time. And Warhol, in his work here, makes a statement about our sort of consumerist culture, how we're consuming all this sort of visual culture all the time of these soup labels, and how we don't really consider it art, but he then sort of elevates it to the level of art through his screen prints. And against a set of 32, he didn't originally sell these for very much money. His gallery owner bought all of them for $1,000 in 1962, which was more than it is today, but still not a lot in 1962. And then his owner later resold all of these for a total of 15 million in the late 90s. So Warhol did profit from these quite a bit eventually, but it did take some time. So why printmaking? Why do artists still make prints? Why is this important? Why are we talking about this? So our first typical reason for making prints is cost. So artists may wish to make multiple works that are less expensive than paintings or sculpture to sort of appeal to a wider audience. So prints can be mass produced. You can sell more work. Mass production. Some artists may strive to influence social causes through their work. So doing a larger print run could be helpful if you're trying to distribute a message. Printmaking also allows for the creation of multiple works that are easy to distribute to a mass audience. And last we have process. So the process of printmaking can be a lot of fun. Artists might just be fascinated with the process, which is an absorbing craft in itself.